Hello everyone, and welcome to 7th grade Math Module 3, Expressions and Equations. In this video, we're looking at Lesson 8, using if-then moves to solve equations. Our learning goal is to make sure we can use properties of math to simplify and solve algebraic expressions. This will help us to master Standard 7 EEB3, solve multi-step real-life and mathematical problems posed with positive and negative rational numbers in any form using tools strategically, and 7 EEB4, use variables to represent quantities in a real-world or mathematical problem and construct simple equations and inequalities to solve problems by reasoning about the quantities. We'll be using the same 5 steps that we have been using in this half of our module, which is first to distribute wherever you can use the distributive property, then combine any like terms, then undo addition or subtraction, then undo multiplication or division, and finally, it's always good to check our answer by evaluating our equation. You're designing a rectangular pet pen for your new baby puppy. You have 30 feet of fence barrier, and you decide you'd like the length to be 6 1/3 feet longer than the width. Draw and label a diagram to represent the pet pen. Write expressions to represent the width and the length of the pen. So I've drawn here a rectangle to represent my pen. I know that I want my width to be something, and that my length is going to be 6 1/3 feet longer than my width. So I'm going to represent the length as width plus 6 1/3, or W plus 6 1/3. I also know that my perimeter that I'll get when I add up all the sides is going to be 30. So in order to find the dimensions of this pet pen using this information, I can either use arithmetic or algebra to help me solve this. For our arithmetic strategy, I'm going to use what I know about perimeter and work backwards to find my width. So since I know my perimeter is 30, I can take away one of the length values I know, which is 6 1/3, to get 23 2/3. Then I can take away the other 6 1/3 from the other length side and get 17 1/3. That 17 1/3 has to be shared with my two width sides, and then also with the width-length pieces of my two length sides. So there are 4 sections that are going to be the same amount to give me that 17 1/3. So I can divide it into 4 equal pieces to find that the width would be 4 1/3. My length will be 6 1/3 longer, so if I add that together, I get that my length would be 10 2/3. To solve this problem algebraically, I must first take all of my information from above and turn it into an equation. Since I know I find perimeter by adding up all of the sides of my shape, I'm going to take the expressions for all of the sides of my shape and add them together and set that equal to 30, my perimeter. Then my next step would be to use the distributive property. Since nothing is being multiplied by what is in parentheses, there's nothing to do there. Next, I would combine like terms. Because I can use the associative property to replace those parentheses, I can add together all of my terms that have W and all of my regular whole number terms to get that there are 4 W's plus 12 2/3, and that is what equals 30. Next, I want to undo addition or subtraction with the inverse. So since in this problem I'm adding 12 2/3, I will subtract 12 2/3 from both sides of my equation. That leaves me with 4W equal to 17 1/3. Now I'm just left with multiplication, so I undo it by doing division of 4 from both sides of my problem, since 4 was the factor or coefficient with W. When I solve that out, I'm left with W equals 4 1/3 feet, the same solution that I got with my arithmetic. So I can see, whichever strategy I use, that I can get the same answer. Nancy's morning routine involves getting dressed, eating breakfast, making her bed, and driving to work. Nancy spends 1/3 of the total time in the morning getting dressed, 10 minutes eating breakfast, 5 minutes making her bed, and the rest of the time driving to work. If Nancy spends 35.5 minutes getting dressed, eating breakfast, and making her bed, how long was her drive to work? Write and solve this problem using an equation. Identify the if-then moves used when solving the equation. Whenever I'm presented with a particularly difficult word problem that I need to write as an equation, I find it helpful to first write an equation with words instead of with numbers so that I can think about the relationships between the things. So I know that we're trying to write an equation using what we know about how long it takes Nancy to get dressed, eat breakfast, and make her bed, her total time before her drive in purple. So I'm going to set my equation equal to that. And I know the things that go into that are dressing, breakfast, and making the bed. So I'm going to take those, and I know that those times add to equal her total amount of time before she drives. So my next step then is just to replace those things with their values. So for dressing, which really is the trickiest part of this, she spends a third of her total time. We don't know what the total time is, so we can use a variable like x to represent it. And 1/3 of a number would be 1/3 times that number, or in this case, 1/3 times x. Breakfast is 10 minutes, making the bed is 5, and her total time before the drive is 35.5. So now that we have this equation, we can solve it using our steps from before. You can pause the video now to try to solve this equation on your own. How did it go? If you followed our steps, you would have seen that there was nothing to use the distributive property on, so your next step was to combine like terms. Our only like terms were our regular constant numbers, 10 and 5. So this would have equaled 1/3 x plus 15. Then you needed to undo your addition of 15 by subtracting 15 from both sides. After that, you're left with 1/3 x equals 20.5 minutes. To undo the 1/3, you could have divided both sides of your equation by 1/3. We already know that when dividing by fractions, we do keep change. So you could have written divided by 1/3, or you could have written times 3, since that's what would happen with keep change. That is the inverse of dividing by a third, multiplying by 3. Either way you write it, you should end up with x equals 61.5 minutes. And that there is our total time. And that makes sense. It should take her longer than 35.5 minutes because she also needs to drive. That, in fact, is the piece that we need to solve for. So now that we know that her total time that she was getting ready and going to work was 61.5 minutes, and we know that all of the things before driving were 35.5 minutes, then all we need to do to figure out how long she was driving is to subtract those two numbers, and we see that she spends 26 minutes driving. What does this make you wonder about solving multi-step equations or writing equations from word problems? Write your questions down so you don't forget them. Then you can try to find answers online or ask a classmate or teacher. Thanks for watching, and when you're trying this on your own, remember, if you learned from your failures, then you succeeded.